Welcome to Finance Files, a podcast hosted by best friends Whitney Coford and Brittany Carter, with occasional appearances from guests and Whit's dad, Greg Coford.
We talk about all things finance, including investing, trading, economics, business management, and capital markets. Learn the investor mindset with us. As a reminder, everything we talk about is purely for entertainment purposes. None of this is investment advice, so make sure to do your own due diligence.
So on that, let's get into Topic Tuesday, and this episode might feel slightly redundant in that we've touched upon kind of the key things that we look at from a due diligence standpoint, but I think we'll just kind of better to solidify like what is our approach, how would we actually like sit down and do this step by step, and then we will actually do a few companies on Thursday and Friday where we are actually walking through those step by step, analyzing them. We chose some fun companies that would just be interesting to talk about that everyone should know, so definitely tune in for those episodes.
So Britt, I'm curious, because you were an analyst, and was that your first professional job?
It wasn't my first professional job. I worked for an early stage tech startup before.
Oh, okay. Before that.
Yeah.
But it was like an early career job.
It was early
right?
20s. Yeah, it was definitely more on the entry level. Like there were people straight out of college that gave that job. It wasn't your stereotypical like if you work in an investment bank, you have like analysts and then you graduate to associate. It wasn't that. Like I was actually like a proper analyst for different industries, and there wasn't necessarily a leveling up. It wasn't an investment bank. We sold our reports to investment banks. So when we talk about the due diligence process, I'm sure anyone who ever did a school report has like gone and searched, hey, what's the market size for this? And the group I worked with, or the company I worked at, is IBIS World. So you'll definitely see, I mean, I actually used one of the reports for some of the figures I used for due diligence this time around. So those were reports that I would write as an analyst.
Okay. What kind of training did they provide when you first started? Like, did they give you like, here's how to do due diligence and write a report? Or was there sort of some leeway for each individual analyst to, kind of tweak the process?
Yeah, so what they had is a very standardized format for their reports. So we kind of lightly touched on a few of those things. For example, we had the key external drivers. So we wanted to look at all the different macroeconomic indicators that would impact the performance of that industry. We also had, what stage of the life cycle is that industry in? Is it declining? Is it mature? Is it growing? We would look at the major companies. So there was a very standardized format as to what we were looking at. I would say from a hiring standpoint, they were more interested in your ability to communicate effectively and just having baseline analytical skills, because it was a lot of writing. It wasn't just, providing the numbers. We wanted to analyze them and provide details. And so I would say that was the most important part of it, but we had a lot of flexibility in terms of how we interpreted those numbers, how we forecasted. A lot of people had very different methods for how they forecasted, but we would obviously learn from one another, cross-reference, and I actually was the first part of a team that instigated the first elements of doing quality assurance testing, verifying people's numbers, because there was such a difference in how people approach this. But not to get too off topic, I think for the purposes of how we did it, it was somewhat standardized in that we had very specific figures that we wanted to research, right? So we wanted to know what was the revenue, overall market size of that business for the past 5 years, and what are we forecasting for the next 5. But yeah, so basically the kind of key metrics we're looking at is like, what's the revenue for the past 5 years? What's the revenue for the next, forecasted next 5 years? We would look at profitability. We would look at how many employees for the industry as a whole, right? How many establishments and how many enterprises. So the variance between that is an establishment would be a location. So for example, Starbucks has thousands of establishments, but Starbucks is one enterprise. So that
Right.
helps you understand. If you can look those up, you can better understand what's the industry concentration, right? Like laundromats are very like not a highly concentrated business,
Sure.
whereas like an airline, there's only so many airline industries, despite having like multiple airports and stuff, right?
Okay. And did
Um,
you focus on specific industries, or were you kind of a generalist and looked at a bunch of different industries that you had to familiarize yourself with?
I covered everything from concrete pipe and block manufacturing to like dating apps. That was like my big Wall Street Journal spread was the dating app industry. But not concrete pipe and block, unfortunately, as exciting as
What?
that
That's
industry
not a
is.
Wall Street Journal spread
I know. I was
material?
like, why don't I get
Shocking.
front page of the business section for that? I guess people are more interested in dating, but yeah. So I think what's cool about that is it shows that the principles of how you get this information are the same. Honestly, it was funny too. At the beginning, when I was an analyst, I only wanted manufacturing reports because I very much was hired for my writing skills, I would say, and I mean, I'd been top of my stats class and everything, but it just was a little intimidating doing all the forecasting for me. So I really liked doing manufacturing because a lot of our data sets, so the government, a lot of the information was publicly provided by the different government departments. And like manufacturing always had every year of historicals, and they typically are a little less volatile. So I just loved those at first. And then after I did my first interview, I was like, wait, I want to do all the reports where I can get some press and like bump my career up. So I transitioned from doing mostly manufacturing to doing a lot of the retail and tech reports, which I think ultimately too was a lot more exciting. I don't know. I'm a nerd, so I could make anything exciting. But it was really fun. But the principles were all the same. So I think when we talk about due diligence and kind of these primary figures, it's not. There's obviously going to be differences for every single industry, and there's going to be parts that are more or less pertinent in terms of looking at the numbers. But the general principles of, volatility, what different factors drive that industry and that company, how it's performant relative to other competitors in the space. Those principles kind of generally stay the same. So the due diligence process is applicable to pretty much every company.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement. And I think you made a good point about it just made me think about like go where your strengths are and lean into the strengths. So you mentioned you got hired because of your writing skills, and so you really leaned into that. But at the same time, you also were working on building confidence with the numbers side of things and the statistical analysis and making sure that you were growing into that. So I think that's part of the investor mindset is where are your strengths, where are you less confident, and how can you improve, right? Like how can you continue to grow? And that's part of the due diligence process is you're not going to get it right every time, but you're going to do the best research you can do with the tools you have.
Well, and actually that too, I would say you need to realize like if we're looking at investing not from this shorts and whatever, like all these different vehicles that you guys covered on Monday,
Options and volatility and
if you just look
futures.
at if you just look at a company from the general principle of do I think the market is growing and do I think this company is able to capitalize on that? If you have that general principle, that should be your general gut check for everything. Because I actually have a funny story. The first report I ever did, it was a paper production industry or like something in this like declining space, like with paper, right? And I was so insecure about my ability to forecast year over year changes that I let one of the other analysts that was in my like onboarding class help me with like because I had my whatever like analysis I had done, and then he did some like crazy weird because he had like a full on like master's in stats or something, and he did some crazy weird way of calculating it. And I remember it had a CAGR, which is like compound annual growth rate. Like it showed like a 3% growth rate basically, which like made no sense because like it was just kind of intuitively like this industry is declining, it has been, but I was so nervous about like my intuition was like this is not right, right? But I was like, well, he has a master's degree and he did this whole formula thing, so he must be right. And I'm going to go with his numbers. And I like actually had to redo the entire report. It was super embarrassing. It was my first report and I felt like a total failure. But it just made me realize like you can look at the numbers all day, you can use all these crazy formulas and tools, but like you also just have to use common sense and your intuition. And I think I just love that we're focused on the investor mindset, which is long-term value creation for companies, because that's something that you're going to even just get a gut feel looking at an industry or company.
For sure. And we're definitely, as we go through the companies this week, we're definitely going to have to talk about like what our gut feelings were and, what the analysis showed. And yeah, as a math major and someone who enjoys numbers, unfortunately, the numbers, you can make numbers illustrate kind of whatever it is you're trying to say, right? Like, for example, you can say, oh, 50% of people, recommend this thing, but like we talked about last week, if your sample size is 2 people, that's not really meaningful, right? But the numbers say that 50% recommend it. So yeah, I'm with you. Like, numbers are helpful, but you have to take them with a grain of salt. You have to check the math because, to your point too, you got to have quality assurance that the numbers are correct. And then on top of that, keep in mind, especially with a lot of the formulas that get used in investing and analysis and due diligence, they're forward looking. And at the end of the day, nobody knows what will happen. So it's a guess, right? So yeah. All right. Well, I'm excited to go through the rest of this week and see kind of how our due diligence processes vary or converge. So it'll be an interesting week, despite my initial intuition that was this will be boring.
Yeah, well, I think we actually chose really fun companies this week, so hopefully keep people engaged. Had we chosen to cover my much loved concrete pipe and block manufacturing industry, we might have put a few people to sleep. But I promise we chose some fun companies, so stay tuned for us to cover those on Thursday.
All right, so that's it for today. Join us tomorrow for Way Back Wednesday, and we'll look into the history of due diligence. Have a good day.